them to win next week because I can't handle Eagles fans if they have success.
Well, I was telling people last night on Facebook, I said, these kinds of things don't normally happen to the Vikings. It usually happens against the Vikings.
I understand. I'm a Redskins fan.
Well, what might be helpful to you in your learning today?
Well, we could hit back on that process reflection I sent through.
Okay. Did you get my responses?
I did. I had a chance to look through them about 45 minutes ago. Oh, look at that. You already printed one out. It's like you expected me to say that.
It was just an idea that
yeah.
I thought maybe you would want to talk about.
Which really, most of the stuff in here I thought you answered pretty well, I guess. I suppose I had sort of a similar situation last night that we can talk about.
Okay.
I handled it differently,
okay.
which was good. Good that I handled it differently. It was good that I'd had a chance to look through these, to process through this, I suppose, once beforehand. Because this sort of thing isn't new.
Yeah.
When I sort of get bogged down or something at work, and I think in here you wrote somewhere, are you suggesting that diving deeper into work was a way of distancing yourself from awareness of anxiety? And that's absolutely true.
Okay.
If I can just keep working on something and work, I'm not thinking about how much I still have to get done.
Yeah.
I don't look for the light at the end of the tunnel. I just figure I'll get there at some point in time. Because that's how it's always worked.
Okay.
If I just keep working, eventually it'll be done. And that stops me from thinking about all I have to do. And so that's sort of been the way I've always done stuff.
And so that, I mean, my other question, I think, in there was, I was wondering if you were saying that opportunities for relaxation or whatever for yourself, in your mind, cannot occur until the tasks are done.
No, I can still find times to relax.
Okay.
However, when I feel like I'm on a deadline and I don't really have time to relax at that point, then just like everybody, I don't have time to relax when I have to get stuff done in a specific amount of time. But usually I'm able to plan ahead far enough to where I have plenty of time to relax in between then. That's not typically the issue.
Okay. Well, you know, I guess I've, for myself, have decided that that's not necessarily true, even with a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
For myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if I can diligently work during the day or whatever hours I have set aside to do that work, and if it's not finished, I'll come back to it the next day.
Mm-hmm. And that was probably the truth at that point in time. It'd just been a long day and I had a lot on my mind.
Okay.
I guess the thing that really had me stressed out probably wasn't all the work. It was probably the thinking of maybe having to move once again. And last year, he asked me if I would move. And I remember sitting on pins and needles, interesting. Pins and needles for about 3 months about
Beatles.
it.
That sounds very British.
Right? He had me sitting on pins and needles for 3 months about it because, I guess where he wanted to move me fell through, so I just said, I don't have to worry about this anymore, right? He said, no, I still want you to think about it because if I find somewhere I'm moving you, I'm like, well, great. And so I'm sort of in that same loop for the next month, 4 months, of not knowing where I'm going to be come July.
Okay.
So that, knowing that was sort of on the table is newly stressful for me.
I can imagine that.
Um,
So, knowing that that's out there, and I gather not necessarily in your control,
no.
all right. So, what do you think would be some steps that might be helpful in not distancing yourself from your anxiety, but regulating it? What resources do you have available to you that would be helpful? I think you mentioned somewhere in here, um, yeah, in G, your guiding principle.
Oh,
You know, before a snap, that other people recognizing anxiety, and then being able to talk about stress and anxiety before this.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, who are you imagining that you might have that resource with, and what other resources do you think would be helpful in living into that
Really,
that principle?
that resource is usually Katie, and to a point it has to be Katie, although sometimes Katie's just as anxious about it as I am, so it doesn't help to talk with her through that, at least in the way I have before. And so that's something to think about. I have friends I talk to about this stuff. Talk to my brothers about this sort of stuff. It's something that comes up occasionally with my brothers, more often with some of my friends. So those are the people that know I stress about that sort of stuff.
I guess my other question is, what impact do you imagine this would have over your learning goals, and what may or may not happen in CPE for the second half of the year?
I think addressing this sort of touches on the learning goal where I'm hoping to be more present, I think is the language I used.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it is, why I don't listen, why I have extreme focus on one thing at times. I can't focus on more than one thing at a time typically.
Yeah.
Which I don't. So last night we had sort of the same thing. Like Wesley's like yelling at me from 3 feet away, and I'm not really paying attention, and I don't think I was particularly stressed out about anything at that point in time. I was just checked out. And Katie brought it back up after Wesley went to bed, and eventually I just said, well, what do you think I should do if I don't notice it? It's not that I'm ignoring you. So instead of sort of yelling back, I sort of asked that question: what strategies do you see that I can use to fix this? And she's sort of like, I don't understand how you can just ignore. That doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm telling you, it's what happens.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it on purpose, I promise.
Well, there's always the old joke that the male of the species was born with selective hearing to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, as you think about it, you know, checking out, I've heard other terms for it, brain fog, or just, where you're just...
I'm not
Yeah,
there.
so yeah, and unaware of what's
Mm-hmm.
what's happening right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this is something that's becoming more common, or
No.
or you've always had this?
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Okay.
No, this hasn't become more common. It's just something I've always done.
Okay. All right. When you become aware of it, what I mean, here you've got, I guess you're fortunate in a way to have Katie to kind of snap you out of it and bring your attention to it.
Yeah.
How have you become aware of it in the past when Katie hadn't been around, or?
Sometimes it's funny, you notice all at once that something like that's happening,
Yeah.
and a sudden shift happens. Like, for instance, you're a parent, your son just keeps tugging your shirt over and over and over, and you're not really paying attention, and all of a sudden you're like, what? That's typically when I notice it.
Okay.
And
when you do notice it, or Wesley breaks through, or whatever, do you normally kind of react with a snappishness?
Not typically to him, no. Probably a little bit more often to Katie.
Okay.
Yeah, probably a little bit more often to Katie, not to him yet. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, as you observe this in yourself, what do you imagine? What do you imagine would be helpful? I mean, I've noticed that in CPE, in your process reflections and in your verbatims, you've indicated that rather than have your mind drift in conversations that you're having with people, you're able to focus and be present with folks.
And that takes a lot of intentionality.
It takes a lot of intentionality.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's maybe at times it's tough to bring that home after work.
Maybe
Maybe that's like a work Carl thing.
Okay. Well, how do you make it just a Carl thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, how do I make it a Carl thing? What does relaxing look like when that's turns into sort of my new normal, because that takes a lot of energy from me to be all the way there.
Okay.
I think part of that not paying attention is sort of a standby mode to recharge a little bit.
So I guess I would maybe add a little piece to your learning goal there. In your efforts to be more present in ministry with people, is then how to integrate that level of concentration into your other relationships as well. I have no idea if this is true or not, but I'm just going to throw it out as a theory that I think that the more you use that muscle, that concentration muscle, it gets stronger.
Probably.
And probably there's less effort in being present. It sounds good. I don't know if it's true or not.
That's how it works for most things.
Yeah.
That seems to be the way most things work, which is probably really what I need to do.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you've made progress at it in your ministry here, and I suspect in your congregational ministry, so it's evident that you could do it. So, at the risk of sounding like a Nike commercial. Yeah, there were some interesting things that I thought of in your process reflection, and part of it was I'm just interested in you know, your decision to leave the computer at home when you're traveling, and you know, part of me wonders what that experience was like. You said it was fine, and that you were able to be present, and to a degree with family.
I still had a phone to take me out of things if I wanted
okay.
to. It was sort of just, the computer was more leaving work behind.
Yeah.
Not so much leaving a device behind so that I was always present, because I didn't want to always be present there. I mean, going to Katie's parents' house is difficult because right now Katie's parents are sleeping in separate bedrooms because her mom just can't handle it, like being around somebody as well right now, because she's going through the chemotherapy and everything.
Sure.
And so we don't have the normal guest bedroom that we have. So we're sleeping in the living room. I wake up and people are already in the living room. As we're getting ready for bed, people are still in the living room. There is no escape in that place.
So you were kind of cornered.
Oh yeah. So I was still finding ways to sort of distance myself and to take trips as much as I could. It snowed about 4 or 5 inches one day, and my father-in-law's snowblower wasn't working, so I went out and shoveled. And the tennis shoes I had, I didn't think about it before we left, but the tennis shoes I had were almost dead, and they had a hole in the sole of them. And here I am outside in 5-degree weather with this jacket on, which isn't a heavy jacket, no gloves, no hat, blue jeans, and these shoes, just to get out of the house for a little bit. So yeah, I found ways to get away.
Okay.
Which may not have been the healthiest ways. After which, my mother-in-law handed me a $50 in Kohl's cash and said, "Go buy new shoes."
Now that you have the driveway, you're able to get through it.
Yeah. So, still, even though the computer wasn't there, I was able to be present. I still found ways to sort of be distant at the same time now, which is healthy there for my sanity.
Well, progress towards anything is done in small increments.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, the leaving at the computer felt like leaving work behind.
That's what it was more than anything. The only work-related issue I had come up all weekend long while we were out is Sunday morning came around and I got a call from one of my churches saying that the church was out of oil, so they were canceling church. The oil company didn't come.
Mm.
That was it.
Those things happen.
Yeah.
So, are you on the computer a lot at home doing church stuff?
Sometimes, more often it's homework I'm doing at home.
Okay.
Because I have homework for this and I have homework for the other class. I think that night I was working, I don't remember what I was working on. But typically it's not church work I'm working at home. In the evenings. I do a lot of work at home during the days because they have internet at my house, and across the street of the church they don't have internet.
Okay.
So I do work at home, but
Okay.
typically during business hours.
Okay. What do you normally do with Katie and Wesley at home on a typical work day?
On a typical work day, Wesley will beg to watch Moana about 5,000 times. We'll make phone calls on my phone. He likes making phone calls to his uncles, and to some of my friends. My friend John this week said, "Carl, Wesley calls me so much," because he knows how to call people on my phone now. He calls me so much, I'm just going to change the name in your phone to Wes. And so he likes to do that. We do puzzles. Last night we played with trains. He likes taking stuff apart and putting it back together. So we'll do that. We might watch a movie or something.
Okay.
During this time of year anyway.
Yeah. All right.
During the summer we might go out and take a walk or something. It's a little cold right now.
Okay.
I typically do the cooking.
Mhm.
Probably 90% of the time I'll be the one cooking.
Does he ever pretend to help you?
We got him a kitchen for Christmas.
Okay.
It's a shopping cart / kitchen, and he takes his fork and knife out. And he presses the buttons, which if you press the soap, it'll go boing boing. Or you twist the knobs, it'll sound like stuff's going on. You put the pots and pans in, it sounds like the oven's on.
Oh wow.
And he's having fun with that.
Neat.
So yeah, and when he's allowed in the kitchen, he has access to the pots and pans cabinet. That's the only cabinet he can get into. So he'll take out the lids for the pots and pans and bang them together. I don't know where he learned how to do it. I don't think I taught him how to do it.
I think it's instinctual.
I think
And
so.
my son did that too.
And then after dinner, Wesley and I will probably play the piano a little bit. He likes to bang the keys while I try to figure out how to play a song, which makes it fun.
Okay.
Talk about not paying attention to distractions around you. That hyper focus helps in that case.
Okay. All right. So that hyperfocus can be both good and also can be problematic.
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting. It's interesting that you're able to find usefulness for that.
It's kind of like how people explain Adderall and just being able to be focused on one thing really extremely well. I can do that. I can't act like I'm not on Adderall.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I just I was just thinking that was an interesting interesting piece insight of your intentionally leaving computer felt like leaving work behind.
It did. It did feel like leaving work behind.
And that's at least this time was an okay feeling for you.
I mean, I got a lot of stuff done before we left.
Yeah.
So I probably overworked a little bit the week beforehand in order to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I see a problem with that. When you know there's a goal of them being able to spend time with family and connect with family.
And I find myself trying to do that more. Like last night I wrote my verbatim for next week. Just because it was more fresh in my mind.
Sure, yeah.
And,
I think that's a good tactic. It's always good to write it when it's freshest.
yeah, then next Sunday I won't have to worry so much about this stuff.
There you go. You can watch a football game.
Something like that.
Yeah. So I think we've. Yeah. So I know you talked about the distancing being on your father's side of the family. I just want to make sure I'm reading this right.
Yeah.
That where it's apparent as a pattern in you is in your relationship with your in-laws.
As it is with my father's side of the family, my paternal side.
Okay.
So my dad is
Alright.
very distant from his in-laws. My grandfather seems to have been distant from his in-laws.
Okay.
That is a pattern.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't seem to be very distant from each other. Me and my dad have a good relationship. We're not as close in relationship as probably my other brothers and him.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a good relationship.
So what would be the difference in your relationship and then maybe your brother's relationship with him, you think?
Me and my dad definitely, we have the relationship in the family where him and I can argue about stuff and not get angry at each other about arguing about stuff. My oldest two brothers typically agree with him on most things, so they don't argue with him. And when they get in our arguments, they end up getting upset. And me and my dad laugh about it. My little brother, he's a little bit more on my side of the spectrum on a lot of things, but he gets really upset about arguments.
Okay.
So him and I can have those sort of conversations, and he's probably one of the only people I can have those conversations with. He's really close to my oldest brother. And I'd say after that, probably the rest of us are about the same in how close we are to our dad.
Was that true growing up?
Yeah.
Did he focus on your older brother?
He focused on him. They have the same interests. Their interests align mostly. They do the same work.
Okay.
Growing up, they work for the same company. Not in the same locality, but they have worked in the same locality. My dad's been my brother's boss many times.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just natural that they're a lot closer together than the rest of us. Because my dad he's an extreme overfunctioner too. My mom told me the other day that he's worked 22 days straight now, which is typical for this time of year in the propane industry. In the summer, he'll take a little bit more time off. Not too much time off, but...
So do you think that closeness with your older brother had an effect growing up on you or maybe your other brothers? Did anybody have a hard time with that, you think?
My little brother seems to have had the hardest time out of anybody with all of that. I never felt like there was a lack of attention.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's closer with Frank, and that's just the way it is. But I never felt a lack of attention from my dad. My little brother, for some reason, he thinks he was bullied or something. And, kid played college football and he thinks he was bullied. Which, in some ways, he probably was, but never at home, really.
Okay.
Yeah, I never really felt that there was a lack of attention from him. Even as he does overwork and overfunction a lot of ways,
Yeah.
he overfunctioned with family too.
But it's interesting that your younger brother maybe has experienced that differently than you.
Yeah. He has experienced it differently than me, and part of that may be it seems like my dad tried to have the same relationship with my younger brother sometimes that he has had with my oldest brother. And my younger brother is not my oldest brother. They were both standout football stars, and Chappie didn't like football, and Frank loves football. Frank's the older brother.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad and Frank, always really close. Let me rephrase that. Chappie doesn't like to play football.
Okay.
He doesn't like having to practice and get yelled at by people. And so my dad sort of pressured him a lot to do that sort
Okay,
of
so
stuff.
there was an expectation
Yeah.
that he would. Okay.
There seems to have been some expectations, and yeah. Chappie and my dad are very similar in a lot of ways, and in some ways they just aren't.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really interesting how siblings sometimes experience.
Yeah.
You know.
Chappie and Frank were probably the most similar out of all the brothers. Lee and I were very different than the other two.
Okay.
Frank was what I've already told you. Then Lee after him, he was severely learning disabled when he was younger. And I guess he's still learning disabled, but he's learned how to cope with it really well. He's a financial advisor. He has a master's degree in business. And we thought he couldn't read until the end of first grade.
Wow.
And so Lee always got some sort of different type of attention put on him by my parents.
Okay.
I was considered the smart one. I don't know if that's really true. I think all of us are smart in different ways. But I was the most book smart out of all of us, probably. I excelled in school, more than Frank for lack of trying, more than Lee for lack of ability, typically. And probably more than Chappie for lack of trying and ability some days. He was still a good student, but not quite as good as I was. And I was also really good at music. And so instead of doing football and playing all sorts of sports, I was in orchestra, and I was in concert choirs, and I was in musicals, and I was in plays, and all sorts of stuff like that. So I got different types of attention from my parents than my other brothers did. So maybe that's why I don't feel like I had a lack of attention.
Okay. Were you affirmed in those kinds of things by both parents, or did your mother maybe give you more attention in those kinds of areas? Okay.
No, but I mean, my dad liked music. I mean, he played piano when he was a kid. He was in musicals. He did that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He prefers football and stuff like that. And so that's not a big deal for me. He was very affirming in all that stuff, though.
Okay. Well, good. I mean, it's interesting being able to reflect and maybe being able to see that your younger brother's experience was different. How do you communicate with him about those kinds of things, or do they get communicated?
I am known as probably the person in the family that's closest to being a peacemaker.
Okay.
And so when he gets stressed, he'll rant to me.
You told me.
Rant to me, rant at me, whatever it is. When he gets in arguments with the family, he'll just call me up and talk about what's going on. When's the last time we had one of these? Has it been since Christmas?
Don't think so.
All right. So Chappie, that's the youngest brother. Over Christmas, he went off the deep end, like with his anger and everything else of the family, and so he went into my dad's office, and my dad introduced Chappie as this crazy liberal son from that goes to graduate school with a crazy liberal girlfriend, and Chappie ends up getting into a debate with one of his office workers, and I can see it happening. My dad, he stopped paying attention for the most part, but every now and then he'll just lob a bomb, like he'll just throw something out there, and Chappie feels less and less affirmed by what's going on, and eventually he